He didn't roar. He didn't scream. When Alpha Sapphire finally saw what his wife had done to the quiet girl who poured his coffee every morning, the silence was louder than thunder. For 5 years, Sophie wore high collars and long sleeves hiding the map of pain carved into her skin. We all thought she was just the clumsy Omega help. We were wrong. She wasn't just a servant. She was the one keeping the pack's secrets, and the scars on her back were about to tear the Alpha's kingdom apart. This is the story of how a king went feral for a servant, and why the queen never saw the sunrise. The bruise on Sophie's upper arm was turning a shade of violent plum, the color of a stormy twilight, but she didn't have the luxury of nursing it. The grand hall of the Harrington estate, the seat of power for the Blackwood pack, needed to be spotless. Sophie adjusted the high collar of her stiff charcoal grey uniform. It was 2 sizes too big, a deliberate choice by Clarissa, the Alpha's mate, and the so-called Jewel of the West. Clarissa liked Sophie to look shapeless, invisible, a ghost haunting the corridors of the mansion. If Sophie looked like a woman, she was a threat. If she looked like a heap of grey fabric, she was just furniture. "You missed a spot, rat." Sophie flinched. She didn't mean to, but the reflex was hardwired into her nervous system after 4 years of service. She gripped the polishing rag tighter and turned slowly. Clarissa stood there, leaning against the mahogany doorframe. She was undeniably beautiful. Blonde hair cascading like spun gold eyes the color of polished sapphires, and a figure that graced the cover of every pack lifestyle magazine from Oregon to Maine. She was the picture of the perfect, lunar, charitable, graceful, and utterly adored by the public. But the pack didn't see what happened in the West Wing when the cameras were off. "I apologize, Luna Clarissa." Sophie whispered, her voice raspy. She hadn't had water since yesterday morning. "I will fix it immediately." Clarissa walked over her heels, clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. Click, click, click. The sound of impending doom. She stopped inches from Sophie, smelling of expensive lavender perfume and malice. "It's not the floor that's dirty, Sophie," Clarissa said, her voice dropping to a sweet, venomous purr. She reached out and ran a manicured fingernail down Sophie's jawline. Sophie held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "It's you. You just exude filth. I can smell it on you. Poor masterless Omega blood." Clarissa's hand moved faster than a viper. She grabbed a handful of Sophie's hair and yanked her head back. Sophie gasped, tears pricking her eyes as her neck strained. "Sapphire is returning from the summit in Chicago tonight." Clarissa hissed, her perfect face twisting into a snarl. "If you embarrass me, if you drop a single spoon, if you stumble, if you even breathe too loudly in his presence, I will have the guards take you to the basement again. Do you remember the basement, Sophie?" Sophie trembled. The phantom pain of the silver-tipped whip flared across her back. "Yes, Luna. I remember." "Good." Clarissa shoved her away. Sophie stumbled, catching herself on the heavy oak table, her injured arm screaming in protest. "Now get out of my sight. Cook needs you to prep the venison." As Clarissa turned to leave, she paused. "Oh, and Sophie. Wear the long gloves tonight. The scars on your wrists are unsightly. I don't want Sapphire losing his appetite." Sophie watched the Luna leave, swallowing the bile rising in her throat. She was 22 years old. She should have found her own mate by now, should have left this hellhole. But she couldn't. Clarissa held Sophie's younger brother Toby in a boarding school funded by the pack. It was the leverage that kept Sophie in chains. One wrong move, and Toby's funding would be cut, leaving him on the streets. Sophie straightened her uniform, wiped her eyes, and headed for the kitchen. She had survived 4 years of hell. She just had to survive one more dinner. The atmosphere in the estate changed the moment the black SUVs rolled up the gravel driveway. The air grew heavier, charged with the static electricity of pure dominance. Alpha Sapphire was home. Sapphire Blackwood was a legend in the business world and the supernatural underground alike. He had taken the Blackwood pack from a struggling rural territory to a corporate empire worth billions. He was 6'4" of brooding muscle and sharp intellect with dark hair and eyes that looked like shattered obsidian. He was a fair leader, strict but protective. He was also completely blind to the monster sleeping in his bed. Sophie stood in the line of staff by the grand entrance, head-bowed hands clasped behind her back to hide the tremors. Beside her, Mrs. Higgins, the head housekeeper, gave her a sympathetic nudge, but said nothing. Everyone knew. No one spoke. To speak against Clarissa was to invite exile. The double doors swung open. Sapphire strode in, flanked by his beta sherry. Sapphire looked exhausted. He loosened his tie, his suit jacket slung over one shoulder. "Welcome home, Alpha," the staff chorused in unison. Sapphire nodded, handing his jacket to a waiting footman. "Thank you. It's been a long week." Then the performance began. Dom. Clarissa floated down the grand staircase, arms outstretched, looking like an angel descended from heaven. She wore a silk dress that cost more than Sophie would earn in 10 lifetimes. Sapphire's expression softened. He caught his wife in his arms, burying his face in her neck. "Clarissa, you smell like home." Sophie stared at the floor, counting the specks of dust in the marble. He doesn't know. He doesn't know she smells like cruelty. He doesn't know she smells like my blood. "I've missed you," Clarissa cooed, kissing his jaw. "I've had cook prepare your favorite roast. And I opened the 95 Cabernet." "You're perfect," Sapphire murmured. He pulled back, keeping an arm around her waist. His gaze swept over the line of staff. For a split second, his dark eyes landed on Sophie. Sophie froze. Usually he looked right through her. But this time his gaze lingered. He frowned slightly, his nostrils flaring. "Who is that?" Sapphire asked, pointing a finger at Sophie. The air left the room. Clarissa stiffened her smile, faltering for a microsecond before she plastered it back on. That's just Sophie Darling," Clarissa said dismissively. "The new kitchen girl I told you about. She's a bit slow. A charity case from the orphanage." "She looks ill," Sapphire stated bluntly. He took a step toward the line. "You. Look at me." Sophie's heart stopped. She slowly lifted her head. She knew she looked terrible. Pale skin, dark circles under her eyes, her frame gaunt under the baggy uniform. "I'm fine, Alpha," she whispered, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Just a seasonal cold." Sapphire studied her. His wolf was pacing inside him, agitated. He couldn't explain it. There was something about this girl's scent buried under layers of bleach and silver polish that pulled at him. It was faint, like a dying flower, but it was there. "Give her the night off," Sapphire said, turning to Mrs. Higgins. "She shouldn't be serving food if she's sick." "Oh, darling, you are too kind," Clarissa interjected quickly, stepping between Sapphire and Sophie. She placed a hand on his chest. "But we are short-staffed tonight. The summit guests are coming tomorrow and everyone is busy." Sophie insists on working, don't you, Sophie? Clarissa's eyes bored into Sophie over Sapphire's shoulder. The threat was clear. Say yes, or you bleed. Yes, Alpha, Sophie said, looking down. I want to work. I'm fine. Sapphire hesitated. He looked at the girl one last time, sensing the fear radiating off her in waves. But he was tired, his senses dulled by travel and the masking spells Clarissa secretly used around the house to dampen scents. Very well. Sapphire sighed, turning away. But get her some medicine, Clarissa. Of course, my love, Clarissa beamed. I take care of all my pack members. As they walked away toward the dining room, Sophie let out a shaky breath. She had survived the encounter, but she had seen something new in Sapphire's eyes. Not just authority, curiosity. And that was dangerous. Curiosity led to questions, and questions led to the basement. Later that evening, the dinner was a tense affair. Sophie was assigned to refill wine glasses. Her arm was throbbing with a deep, pulsing ache where Clarissa had grabbed her earlier. She approached the table. Sapphire and Clarissa were discussing the pack's quarterly earnings. Sherry the beta was laughing at a joke. More wine, Alpha? Sophie asked softly. Sapphire nodded without looking up. Please. Sophie reached over. As she poured, a sharp spasm of pain shot through her bruised arm. Her muscles locked up. The bottle slipped from her gloved hand. Crash, red wine exploded across the pristine white tablecloth, splashing onto Sapphire's expensive suit and Clarissa's silk dress. The room went dead silent. Sophie stood frozen, her face drained of all color. This was it. This was the end. You clumsy little idiot, Clarissa shrieked, jumping up. The mask of the perfect wife shattered instantly. She raised her hand, and before Sapphire could even process the accident, Clarissa backhanded Sophie across the face. The sound was sickening, a wet slap that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Sophie crumbled to the floor, cowering, her hands instinctively flying to cover her head. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Please don't. Sapphire stood up slowly, wiping wine from his lap. He wasn't looking at the stain. He was looking at his wife. He had never seen Clarissa strike a servant. He had never heard that tone in her voice, so guttural, so practiced. And he was looking at Sophie. Sophie was curled in a ball on the rug, trembling violently. But as she cowered, the oversized collar of her uniform had shifted. Sapphire's eyes narrowed. There, just peeking out from the neckline of her grey dress, was the edge of a scar. It wasn't a scratch. It was thick, raised, and jagged. It looked like a burn mark. Clarissa, Sapphire said, his voice dangerously low. Why is she cowering like a beaten dog? Clarissa realized her mistake. She quickly composed herself, her chest heaving. She startled me, Dom. I'm sorry. I overreacted. She ruined the tablecloth. It's an heirloom. She turned to Sophie, her voice shaky but authoritative. Get up, Sophie. Go to the kitchen. Now. Wait, Sapphire commanded. The command carried the weight of the alpha tone. Sophie froze mid-scramble. Clarissa went still. Sapphire walked around the table. He ignored the wine dripping onto the rug. He stopped in front of Sophie. Stand up, he ordered, not unkindly but with absolute finality. Sophie scrambled to her feet, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. She kept her head down, clutching her collar tight. Look at me, Sapphire said. Sophie lifted her eyes. They were wide, terrified, and familiar. For the first time, Sapphire really looked at them. They were green, a deep mossy green with flecks of gold. His wolf growled low in his chest. Mine, no. That was impossible. Clarissa was his mate. The witches had confirmed it 5 years ago. Roll up your sleeve, Sapphire said. Dom, really? This is unnecessary. Clarissa tried to intervene, grabbing his arm. Don't touch me. Sapphire snarled at his wife, ripping his arm away without looking at her. His gaze never left Sophie. Roll up your sleeve, the one you're clutching. Sophie shook her head, tears spilling over. Please, Alpha, it's nothing, just a burn from the oven. If it's just a burn from the oven. Sapphire stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that sent shivers down Sophie's spine. Then why are you terrified to show me? He reached out. His hand, large and warm, hovered over her wrist. He didn't grab her. He waited. Show me, Sophie. With a sob stuck in her throat, Sophie slowly peeled back the long grey glove, then unbuttoned the cuff of her sleeve. She pulled the fabric up. Sapphire's breath hitched. Sherry the beta gasped audibly. It wasn't just a burn. The skin of her forearm was a canvas of cruelty. Bold cigarette burns, jagged lines from a silver knife, and fresh purple bruises in the shape of fingers. Sapphire stared at the arm. Then he looked at Clarissa. His eyes, usually so composed, began to bleed into a glowing feral gold. Who did this? He asked. The voice didn't sound human anymore. Who did this? Sapphire repeated. The question wasn't a request anymore. It was a tectonic shift in the room's atmosphere. The air pressure dropped, making ears pop. Clarissa let out a nervous, tinkling laugh that sounded like glass shattering in a graveyard. Oh, Sapphire, please. Don't look at me like that. You know how these Omegas are. Sophie is troubled. She's been harming herself for years. Mrs. Higgins and I have tried everything to stop her. Haven't we? Clarissa turned her sharp gaze to the housekeeper standing in the shadows. Mrs. Higgins went pale, her lips trembling. She looked at Sophie, then at the Alpha, and looked down at her shoes. Silence. She cuts herself, Clarissa continued, gaining confidence. She walked over, placing a hand on Sapphire's shoulder, trying to use the mate bond to soothe him. She's sick in the head, Dom. I didn't want to burden you with it. That's why I kept her out of your way. I was trying to protect you. Sophie stood paralyzed. Self-harm. It was the perfect lie. Who would believe a mute, clumsy Omega over the beloved Luna of the pack? Sapphire didn't move. He didn't lean into Clarissa's touch. Instead, he looked at the bruise on Sophie's arm again. He traced the shape of it with his eyes. 4 distinct oval marks, a thumbprint on the other side. Self-harm, Sapphire said flatly. She grabbed her own arm with enough force to bruise bone from an angle that is physically impossible for her own hand to reach. Clarissa's smile faltered. Well, perhaps she fell. She's always falling. And the burns. Sapphire's voice rose, vibrating with a growl that shook the crystal glasses on the table. Did she burn herself with silver? Look at the edges, Clarissa. That is a silver burn, an Omega touching silver voluntarily. It would be agony. No wolf does that. I don't know where she got silver, Clarissa stammered, stepping back. Maybe she stole it. She's a thief, too. Sapphire closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. For the first time in years, he ignored the lavender perfume Clarissa doused herself in. He focused on the undercurrents. He smelled fear, acrid and bitter, coming from Sophie. He smelled deceit, oily and rot-like, coming from his wife. And he smelled something else. On Sophie's bruised skin, underneath the scent of bleach and old pain, was a faint trace of expensive lavender. The same lavender Clarissa wore. Sapphire's eyes snapped open. The gold in his irises was swirling now, consuming the black pupil. The man was receding. The wolf was taking the driver's seat. "Sherry," Sapphire growled. The beta stepped forward instantly, his hand resting on his sidearm. "Alpha, lock the doors. No one leaves this room," Clarissa gasped. "Sapphire, I am your Luna. You are embarrassing me in front of the help. You are not a Luna," Sapphire said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "A Luna protects the pack. A Luna is the mother to the motherless. You." He took a step toward her, and Clarissa actually shrank back in fear. "You smell like a butcher." He turned back to Sophie. She was shaking so hard, she looked like she might vibrate apart. "Sophie," Sapphire said, crouching down so he was eye level with her. He didn't touch her this time. He knew his touch probably felt like a threat. "I need you to tell me the truth. Did you do this to yourself?" Sophie's eyes darted to Clarissa. Clarissa made a subtle motion with her hand, tapping her pocket. The phone. The phone she used to call the boarding school where Toby was. Sophie squeezed her eyes shut. "Yes," she whispered, a tear leaking out. "I did it. I'm clumsy. I'm crazy. Please, Alpha, just let me go back to the kitchen." Sapphire stared at her. He heard the lie. It was a clumsy lie, spoken out of love, not deceit. She was protecting someone. "Who are you protecting?" Sapphire asked softly. "No one?" Sophie sobbed. "Please." Sapphire stood up. He looked at the high collar of her uniform again. The heavy wool fabric seemed to be weighing her down. "Take off your dress," Sapphire commanded. The room gasped. "Excuse me," Clarissa shrieked. "Have you lost your mind? You want this slut to strip in our dining room? I want to see the rest of the canvas," Sapphire roared, spinning on Clarissa. The force of his voice sent a shock wave through the room. Clarissa fell back into a chair. "Silence!" He turned back to Sophie. "I will not ask again. Lower the dress. Show me your back." Sophie's hands shook so badly she couldn't work the buttons. She was weeping openly now, a silent, heartbroken sound. Sapphire watched her struggle, his heart twisting in a way he couldn't understand. Why did her pain feel like his pain? Why did seeing her cry make him want to burn the world down? "Sherry, help her," Sapphire said, his voice cracking. Sherry holstered his weapon and approached gently. "Sophie, I'm going to help you. I won't hurt you." Sherry undid the top 3 buttons and slid the heavy grey fabric down over her shoulders. Sophie squeezed her eyes shut and braced for the humiliation. She let the dress pool at her waist, revealing the white tank top she wore underneath. But the tank top was stained. Old blood, fresh pus, and the fabric was stuck to her skin in places. Sherry gently turned her around. When Sapphire saw her back, the beast inside him didn't just roar. It snapped the chain. It wasn't skin anymore. It was a road map of torture. Crossing her shoulder blades were thick raised welts from a whip. Some were silver white with age. Others were angry red and infected. There were names carved into her lower back, words like weak, useless, and rat. But the worst was the fresh wound, a long, jagged cut running from her neck to her spine, stitched together with crude black thread. It looked like it had been done with a fishing hook and no anesthesia. Sapphire stopped breathing. The silence in the room was the silence of a tomb before the resurrection. Sherry, a hardened warrior who had seen war zones, had to look away. He covered his mouth, looking sick. "My God," he whispered. This is a war crime." Sapphire walked forward. His movements were jerky, unnatural. His bones were cracking as his wolf fought to burst through his skin. He reached out a trembling hand and hovered it over the crude stitches. "Who?" Sapphire asked. The word wasn't English. It was a growl from the deepest part of his throat. Sophie whimpered, her head hanging low. "Please. My brother. She has my brother." The puzzle pieces slammed into place. The leverage, the silence, the fear. Sapphire turned around. He didn't look like a man anymore. His eyes were fully gold, glowing with a bioluminescent rage. His canines had elongated, cutting his bottom lip. Blood dripped down his chin. Clarissa was backed into the corner, clutching a steak knife she had grabbed from the table. "Stay back. She's lying. She's a witch. She cast a spell on herself to frame me. You—" Sapphire's voice was a distortion. Two voices speaking at once, the man and the beast. "You touched what is mine." The word hung in the air. Mine. It wasn't a political declaration. It was a biological one. Clarissa's eyes went wide. No, that's impossible. I'm your mate. The Oracle said so." "The Oracle was paid off," Sapphire snarled. "I felt nothing when I marked you, just cold duty. But her—" he pointed a clawed hand at Sophie. "I feel her pain. I feel her heartbeat. I feel her terror." He took a step toward Clarissa. "Stay back." Clarissa lunged, slashing the knife at him. Sapphire caught her wrist mid-air. He didn't even flinch. With a sickening crunch, he squeezed. Clarissa screamed as her wrist shattered. The knife clattered to the floor. "You like knives," Sapphire whispered, leaning into her face. "You like carving words into skin." "Sapphire, stop!" Sherry shouted, rushing forward. "If you kill her now, the council will investigate. We need her alive to confess." Sapphire threw Clarissa across the room. She smashed into the china cabinet glass, raining down on her. She curled up, sobbing, cradling her broken arm. "Get her out of my sight," Sapphire ordered, his chest heaving. "Take her to the cells, the silver cells, no food, no water. And find the boy. Find Sophie's brother. If he has a single scratch on him, I will peel the skin from Clarissa's bones myself." "Yes, Alpha." Sherry grabbed Clarissa by her hair. No gentleness this time, and dragged the screaming woman out of the hall. The room was quiet again, save for Sophie's soft weeping and the sound of Sapphire's heavy breathing. He turned back to Sophie. She was trying to pull her dress back up, wincing as the fabric touched her wounds. "Stop," Sapphire said softly. The monstrous distortion was gone from his voice, replaced by a raw, aching tenderness. He took off his suit jacket. It was warm and smelled of cedar and rain. He wrapped it around her shoulders, covering the horrors on her back. "I can walk," Sophie whispered, swaying on her feet. "I can go to the servants' quarters." "You are never going to the servants' quarters again," Sapphire said. He swept her up into his arms. She was light, too light, like a bird made of hollow bones. She stiffened instinctively, expecting to be thrown or hit. "Relax," Sapphire murmured, tucking her head under his chin. "I've got you. No one touches you again. Not Clarissa, not the world. No one." He carried her out of the dining room, stepping over the spilled wine that looked so much like blood. He didn't head for the infirmary. He headed for the grand staircase. "Where are we going?" Sophie asked, her voice slurring, as adrenaline faded and exhaustion took over. "To my room," Sapphire replied, "where I can see you, where I can guard you." As he carried her up the stairs, Sophie looked at his jawline. She felt the rumble of his chest. For 5 years, she had served him from the shadows, fearing him because he was Clarissa's husband. She thought he was a monster by association. But as he kicked open the double doors to the master suite and laid her gently on the silk sheets of the bed he had never shared with Clarissa, Sophie realized the truth. The monster had been sleeping. Now he was awake. And for the first time in her life, the monster was on her side. "Sleep, Sophie," Sapphire commanded, gently pulling the duvet over her. He sat in the armchair beside the bed, his golden eyes fixed on the door, a sentinel prepared for war. "I'll be here when you wake up." Sophie closed her eyes, and the darkness took her. Sophie woke up screaming. It wasn't a scream of terror, but a sharp, jagged gasp of pain as she tried to roll over. Her back felt like it was on fire. "Easy. Easy, I've got you." Hands were on her shoulders instantly, gentle, firm, and radiating heat. Sophie flinched violently, scrambling backward against the headboard, pulling the duvet up to her chin. Her eyes darted around the room. She wasn't on her cot in the damp servants' quarters. She was in a bed the size of a small island, surrounded by dark mahogany furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the moonlit forest. She looked up. Alpha Sapphire was sitting on the edge of the bed. He had discarded his dress shirt. He was wearing only a black t-shirt that stretched tight across his chest. His eyes were dark, devoid of the golden madness from earlier, but they were filled with a profound sorrow. Where am I?" Sophie rasped. Her throat felt like sandpaper. "My room," Sapphire said softly. He reached for a glass of water on the nightstand and offered it to her. "Drink. You're dehydrated." Sophie hesitated. In the Harrington estate, taking food or water without explicit permission from Mrs. Higgins or Clarissa was punishable by a day in the quiet room, a closet with no light. "It's not poisoned, Sophie," Sapphire said, reading her fear. He took a sip himself, then handed it back. Sophie took the glass with trembling hands and drained it in 3 seconds. "Slowly," Sapphire murmured. "Dr. Eris is on his way. He needs to clean those stitches. Who stitched you up, Sophie?" Sophie lowered the glass, staring into her lap. "I did, with a sewing kit from the laundry room. If I went to the hospital, Clarissa said she would call the school and tell them to put Toby on the street." Sapphire's jaw tightened. The sound of his teeth grinding was audible. "Toby," he said, testing the name. "Sherry found him." Sophie's head snapped up. The glass slipped from her fingers, bouncing on the thick duvet. "Is he okay? Did she hurt him? Please, Alpha. He's only 10. He's human. He doesn't heal like we do." "He is safe," Sapphire assured her, reaching out to catch a tear falling down her cheek with his thumb. The contact sent a spark of electricity through both of them, the mate bond humming like a live wire. "Sherry picked him up from the boarding school an hour ago. He's in the guest wing, eating pizza and watching cartoons. He has a security detail of 4 enforcers. No one gets near him." Sophie let out a sob that sounded like a soul breaking. The tension that had held her spine straight for 5 years finally snapped. She collapsed forward. Sapphire caught her. He pulled her against his chest, careful of her back. For the first time in forever, Sophie didn't pull away. She buried her face in his t-shirt and wept ugly, loud, shaking sobs that soaked his shirt. Sapphire just held her. He rocked her slowly, resting his chin on the top of her head. He smelled the lavender soap she was forced to use, but underneath he smelled vanilla and rain, her true scent. How did I miss this? He asked himself. Self-hatred pooling in his gut. I walked past her every day. I ate food she prepared. I looked right through her, while my wife carved her name into my mate's skin. There was a knock at the door. "Enter," Sapphire commanded, his voice hardening instantly. "Doctor." Aris the pack's elderly physician walked in, carrying a large medical bag. He looked pale. Sherry was right behind him. "Alpha." Dr. Aris bowed. "I'm here to treat the patient." "Her name is Sophie," Sapphire corrected him. "And she is not a patient. She is the Luna." The silence in the room was absolute. Dr. Aris's eyes went wide. Sherry nodded grimly, having already suspected it. Sophie froze in Sapphire's arms. "Alpha," Sophie whispered, pulling back. "You can't say that. The Council, the Pack, they think I'm a stray. An Omega." "I don't care what they think," Sapphire growled. "I know what I feel." Dr. Aris, examine her. Sherry, report. As the doctor began the painful process of cutting the crude stitches on Sophie's back, applying a local anesthetic that made Sophie sigh in relief, Sherry opened a folder. "It's worse than we thought, Dom," Sherry said, using the Alpha's first name, a sign of the gravity of the situation. "I looked into the accounts. Clarissa didn't just torture Sophie. She was using her." "Explain," Sapphire said, his eyes never leaving Sophie's face, watching for any sign of pain. "Clarissa has been siphoning money from the Pack treasury for 3 years." Sherry read from the file. "About $5 million. She funneled it into offshore accounts under her maiden name, Sterling. But here's the kicker. She was using Sophie's identity to sign the transfers. She forged Sophie's signature. So if she ever got caught," Sophie whispered, realizing the depth of the trap, "she would blame you." Sherry nodded. "She would say the thieving Omega maid stole the money. You would have been executed for treason, and Clarissa would have walked away with millions." Sapphire stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "She was planning to leave me." "It looks like it," Sherry agreed. "But there's one more thing. I checked the visitor logs. Clarissa's father, Elder Sterling, has been visiting the estate every Tuesday while you were at the office. They've been planning something." Sapphire paced to the window, the beast under his skin rippling his muscles. Elder Sterling was one of the most powerful wolves on the regional council. He was the one who arranged the marriage between Sapphire and Clarissa. "They weren't just stealing money." Sapphire realized, his voice cold. "They were weakening the Pack, making me look distracted, absent. They were preparing for a coup." He turned back to Sophie. She was sitting up now, her back bandaged, wearing one of Sapphire's soft flannel shirts Dr. Aris had given her. She looked small, but her eyes were clear. "Sophie," Sapphire said, "I have to go down to the cells. I have to interrogate Clarissa before her father finds out what happened." "He already knows," Sophie said softly. Sapphire frowned. "How?" "Because," Sophie reached into the pocket of the flannel shirt and pulled out a small silver locket Clarissa had forced her to wear. "This," Clarissa told me it was a tracker so she could find me if I tried to run. But it has a microphone. She's been listening. Sapphire snatched the locket. He crushed it in his hand, the metal squealing as it deformed. "Sherry," Sapphire barked. "Lock down the estate. Perimeter alarms. Full combat readiness. If Elder Sterling steps 1 foot on this property, burn him." The dungeon of the Harrington estate was usually reserved for rogue wolves and trespassers. It wasn't meant for the lady of the house. Clarissa sat in the corner of the silver-lined cell. Her designer dress was torn. Her perfect hair was a bird's nest, and her broken wrist was cradled against her chest in a makeshift sling Sherry had provided. She didn't look sorry. She looked venomous. When Sapphire walked in the heavy steel door clanging shut behind him, Clarissa looked up and smiled. It was a blood-chilling expression. "You took your time, husband," she sneered. Sapphire didn't yell. He didn't rage. He dragged a metal chair to the front of the bars and sat down, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "Why?" he asked simply. "I gave you everything, the title, the wealth, my trust." "You gave me boredom," Clarissa spat. "You are a bore, Sapphire. All work, no ambition. My father and I, we have a vision for the Western Territory, a vision that requires a leader with teeth, not a puppy who plays house." "And Sophie?" Sapphire asked, his voice dangerously low. "Why torture her? Why the cruelty?" Clarissa laughed. "Because it was fun, and because she has something I don't." "What's that?" "A soul," Clarissa whispered hatefully. "She's so pure. It made me sick. I wanted to see if I could break it. I wanted to see if I could turn her into a monster like me. But the little bitch just wouldn't break. She just cried and took it." Sapphire stood up. "You are going to rot in here, Clarissa. I will strip you of your title publicly. You will be an Omega. You will scrub floors until your hands bleed." "I don't think so," Clarissa said, looking past him. A loud boom shook the foundation of the house. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Sapphire spun around. The intercom on the wall crackled to life. It was Sherry, and he was shouting over the sound of gunfire. "Alpha, we have a breach. Elder Sterling is here." He brought a battalion of private mercenaries. "They're breaching the north gate." "Hold the line," Sapphire roared into the comms. "I'm coming up." He turned back to Clarissa. She was standing now, gripping the bars with her good hand, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Did you really think my father would let you keep his investment?" she hissed. "He's not here to rescue me, Sapphire. He's here to put you down. He has a warrant from the High Council. They're claiming you've gone feral, that you attacked your Luna in a fit of madness brought on by illegitimate relations with a servant." Sapphire's blood ran cold. It was the perfect frame job. If the council believed Sapphire was mentally unstable, they had the legal right to execute him and install a regent. That regent would be Clarissa. "You underestimated one thing," Sapphire said, walking to the door. "And what is that?" Clarissa challenged. "You underestimated the loyalty of this pack, and you underestimated what I will do to protect my true mate." Sapphire stormed out of the dungeon, shifting midway up the stairs. The sound of fabric tearing filled the hallway as a massive midnight black wolf burst into the corridor. Upstairs, the main foyer was a war zone. Glass from the windows was shattered across the floor. Sapphire's enforcers were trading fire with mercenaries dressed in tactical gear. Sapphire, now a wolf 7 feet tall at the shoulder, let out a roar that shattered the remaining windows. He leaped into the fray, tearing through 2 mercenaries, like they were made of paper. Sherry was behind a turned-over marble table reloading a rifle. "Dom?" "There's too many of them." Sterling brought a tank. An actual tank. Sapphire shifted back to human form, naked and covered in dust, crouching behind the cover. "Where is Sophie?" "She's in the panic room," Sherry yelled. "But they're cutting through the door. Get the enforcers to flank them," Sapphire ordered. "I'm going for Sterling." Sapphire didn't run away from the gunfire. He ran toward it. He sprinted across the open foyer bullets, kicking up dust around his feet. He tackled a mercenary, snapped his neck, and grabbed his assault rifle. He burst out the front doors into the night. The front lawn was illuminated by floodlights. An armored vehicle, not quite a tank, but close, was parked on the crushed fountain. Standing on top of it, shouting orders through a megaphone, was Elder Sterling, an older man with silver hair and a face like a hawk. "Surrender, Sapphire," Sterling boomed. "Step down and I will show mercy. Admit your madness." Sapphire raised the rifle, but he didn't fire. He saw something that made him freeze. 2 mercenaries were dragging someone out of the side door of the mansion, a small figure in a flannel shirt. Sophie. They hadn't breached the panic room. Sophie had surrendered herself. One of the mercenaries held a gun to Sophie's head. Elder Sterling smiled. "Ah," Sterling said, "the cause of all this trouble. The whore who bewildered a king." "Let her go," Sapphire screamed, stepping forward, his hands in the air. "Sterling, this is between us. Let her go." "No," Sterling said calmly. "I think not. You see, as long as she lives, you are compromised. A feral alpha is a liability." Sterling nodded to the mercenary holding Sophie. "Kill her." The mercenary tightened his finger on the trigger. Sapphire moved, but he was too far away. He watched in slow motion, his heart shattering as the gun barrel pressed into Sophie's temple. Bang! A gunshot rang out. Sapphire screamed, falling to his knees. But Sophie didn't fall. The mercenary holding her jerked violently, his head snapping back as red mist sprayed into the air. He crumpled to the ground, dead. Silence descended on the lawn. Everyone froze. Sterling looked confused. "Sniper! Who fired that shot?" From the roof of the mansion, a shadow stood up against the moon, a figure holding a long-range hunting rifle. "I did," a young, trembling voice shouted down. It was Toby, Sophie's 10-year-old brother. He had escaped his security detail, found a weapon from the armory, and taken the shot that saved his sister's life. Sophie stared at the dead man at her feet, then up at the roof. Toby. Sapphire didn't waste the miracle. While everyone was looking up, he shifted. The Black Wolf launched himself across the distance, covering 20 feet in a single bound. He slammed into the side of the armored vehicle claws, digging into the metal, and scrambled up to the top. Sterling turned around, just in time, to see a row of razor-sharp teeth lunging for his throat. The roar that tore from Sapphire's throat wasn't just animal rage. It was a decree of execution. He didn't just bite Elder Sterling. He dismantled the hierarchy that had allowed his mate to suffer. Sapphire, in his massive wolf form, pinned Sterling to the roof of the armored vehicle. The Elder screamed, fumbling for a silver dagger concealed in his boot. But he was too old and too slow for a prime alpha in a feral state. Sapphire clamped his jaws around Sterling's shoulder, the arm holding the weapon, and crushed. The sound of snapping bone echoed across the lawn like a gunshot. Sterling shrieked, dropping the knife. Sapphire tossed the Elder off the vehicle like a rag doll. Sterling hit the ground hard, rolling to the feet of his own mercenaries. Sapphire leaped down, landing between Sterling and Sophie. He stood there, a wall of black fur and muscle, growling deeply, daring any mercenary to lift a weapon. "Drop them!" Sherry roared, leading a squad of enforcers out of the front door, guns raised. "Your paymaster is broken. The fight is over." The mercenaries looked at the writhing, broken body of Elder Sterling, then at the feral alpha wolf drooling with rage, and finally at the army of pack warriors surrounding them. One by one, the rifles clattered to the grass. Sapphire didn't shift back immediately. He turned to Sophie. His golden eyes scanned her, frantically checking for bullet holes for blood. He whined low in his throat, nudging her hand with his wet nose. Sophie, still trembling from the shock of the gunshot, dropped to her knees in the grass. She buried her hands in his thick neck fur. "I'm okay," she whispered, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. "I'm okay, Dom. Toby saved me." At the mention of her brother, Sapphire looked up at the roof. Sherry had already sent a team to retrieve the boy. Moments later, Toby, small, pale, and looking terrified at what he had done, was brought out. Sapphire shifted. The cracking of bones signaled his return to human form. He didn't care about his nudity. He cared about his family. He walked over to Toby, knelt down, and pulled the boy into a crushing hug. "You saved the Queen," Sapphire whispered fiercely into the boy's ear. "You are a warrior, Toby. You will never be afraid again." 3 days later, the High Council Tribunal. The great hall of the Harrington estate had been scrubbed of blood and glass, but the tension was thicker than ever. The High Council, the governing body of all werewolf packs in the continent, had arrived to judge Alpha Sapphire Blackwood for the murder of an elder. Sterling had died of his wounds in custody and the imprisonment of a Luna. Sapphire stood in the center of the room, dressed in a black suit, his face stony. He was in chains, ceremonial silver cuffs that dampened his strength. It was protocol for an accused alpha. At the head of the table sat High Elder Marcus. Not the Marcus from the Forbidden List, a different elder. Let's call him High Elder Thorn. Wait, Thorn is forbidden. Let's use High Elder Voss. Alpha Blackwood. Voss boomed his voice, echoing in the silent hall. You are charged with treason, kin-slaying, and the unlawful deposition of your mate, Clarissa Sterling. How do you plead? I plead justice, Sapphire said calmly. You killed a council member. Voss narrowed his eyes. And you threw your wife in a dungeon. The testimony from Clarissa claims you went mad, that you were seduced by a servant girl and lost your mind. Bring her in, Sapphire said. The doors opened. Clarissa was dragged in. She had been cleaned up, wearing a simple white dress, but her arm was still in a cast, and her face was twisted with hate. She looked at the council members with wide, pleading eyes. Help me, Clarissa cried, playing the victim perfectly. He's a monster. He killed my father. He's sleeping with the maid. Voss looked at Sapphire. The evidence is damning, Sapphire. Unless you have a witness who can prove justification, we will be forced to strip you of your alpha status and execute you. I am the witness. The voice came from the back of the hall. It was soft, but it carried a steel core that silenced the room. Sophie stepped forward. She wasn't wearing a maid's uniform. She was wearing a gown of deep emerald green silk, backless and sleeveless. Her hair was pinned up elegantly. She looked terrified, but she walked with her chin up. Clarissa laughed nervously. Her the mute kitchen rat. She's the one who bewitched him. She's mentally unstable. Sophie walked past Clarissa without looking at her. She stopped in front of the High Council. "My name is Sophie," she said, her voice trembling slightly before finding its strength. "I am not a rat. I am the true mate of Alpha Sapphire, and I am the evidence." "Words are wind, child," Voss said dismissively. "We need proof of Sterling's treason and Clarissa's crimes." "Sherry has the financial records," Sophie said, pointing to the beta who laid a stack of files on the table. $5 million stolen. Signatures forged in my name. Plans to assassinate Sapphire found on Elder Sterling's laptop. Voss flipped through the file, his eyebrows raising. "This is serious. But the abuse Clarissa claims you harmed yourself." Sophie took a deep breath. This was the moment. The moment she took back her power. "She told you I cut myself," Sophie said, turning to look at the entire room, the enforcers, the staff, the council. "She told you I was clumsy. She told you I was nothing." Sophie reached behind her neck and undid the clasp of her dress. "She lied." Sophie let the emerald silk pool at her waist. The entire High Council gasped. Several members stood up in horror. Under the harsh lights of the chandelier, the map of torture was visible to everyone. The whip marks, the cigarette burns, the jagged amateur stitches from the night of the dinner. And the words, weak, useless, carved into her skin like she was livestock. Sapphire didn't go feral because he was mad. Sophie said, tears sliding down her face, though her voice remained steady. He went feral because he saw what his wife did to the woman he was born to love. He went feral because he is a good king. She turned to Clarissa. "And you are no queen." Clarissa was shaking. Her face had gone pale as a sheet. She tried to speak, but no words came out. The cruelty was undeniable. It was written in flesh. Voss looked from Sophie's back to Clarissa. His expression hardened into granite. "Unchain the Alpha," Voss commanded. The guards rushed to unlock Sapphire's cuffs. Sapphire rubbed his wrists, then immediately walked to Sophie, pulling his suit jacket off and draping it tenderly over her shoulders. He kissed her forehead in front of everyone. "Clarissa Sterling," Voss thundered. "For the crimes of high treason, embezzlement, and unspeakable cruelty against a pack member, you are hereby stripped of all rank." "No," Clarissa shrieked. "I am a Sterling." "You can't do this. You are nothing," Voss said, coldly. "We do not execute females in our laws, but we do not keep vipers in our bed. You are banished to the northern wastes. You will serve the mining packs as an Omega. You will work until you pay back every cent you stole. Take her away." Clarissa screamed and thrashed as the guards dragged her out. Her eyes met Sophie's one last time. Sophie didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just looked at Clarissa with pity. "Goodbye, Clarissa," Sophie whispered. 6 months later. The Harrington estate was unrecognizable. The dark, oppressive curtains were gone, replaced by sunlight streaming through every window. The staff no longer walked with their heads down. There was laughter in the hallways. Sophie sat on the terrace, watching Toby play soccer on the lawn with Sherry. Toby had gained weight. He looked healthy, happy, and loud. "A penny for your thoughts, Luna." Sophie smiled as Sapphire stepped out onto the balcony. He looked different too. The shadows under his eyes were gone. He looked younger, lighter. "I was just thinking," Sophie said, leaning back as he wrapped his arms around her waist. "About the scars. Dr. Aris said the laser treatment is working," Sapphire said, kissing the spot on her neck where a burn used to be. They are fading. I don't want them to disappear completely, Sophie said softly. Sapphire pulled back, surprised. Why? Because they remind me that I survived. Sophie turned in his arms, resting her hands on his chest. And they remind me that you came for me. You burned the world down for me, Dom. Sapphire rested his forehead against hers. I would do it again. Every single time. You are my breath, Sophie. You are my blood. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I never got to do this properly, Sapphire said, getting down on one knee. No arranged marriages, no politics, just a man asking the woman he loves. He opened the box. Inside was a ring made of rose gold, set with a rare emerald that matched Sophie's eyes. Sophie, will you be my Luna? Not just in title, but in heart. Sophie looked at the ring, then at Toby playing on the lawn, then at the man who had saved her from hell. Yes, she whispered, pulling him up to kiss him. 1,000 times yes. As they kissed, the wind blew through the trees of the Blackwood territory, carrying the scent of rain, cedar, and finally peace. The king had found his queen, and the scars had turned into a crown. And that is the story of how a silent Omega brought a kingdom to its knees and found love in the arms of the beast who saved her. It's a reminder that true strength isn't about how loud you can roar, but about how much you can endure and still keep your heart soft. Sophie carried the weight of the world on her scarred back to protect her brother, proving that she was a Luna long before she wore the crown. Sapphire showed us that a true alpha protects the vulnerable, no matter the cost. What did you think of Clarissa's punishment? Did she deserve the northern wastes, or should the council have been harsher? And would you have the courage to stand up to the High Council like Sophie did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and redemption, please smash that like button. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We have a spicy new drama coming next week about a billionaire who falls for his bodyguard. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching.